$3.8 billion. In 1999, that number exploded across global headlines and instantly entered social legend. Newspapers called it the largest divorce settlement in history, a figure so large it bordered on abstraction, a sum most people could not truly imagine. It was awarded to a woman whose face had become famous not for beauty, but for transformation. Jocelyn Wildenstein was no ordinary divorcee. She was the woman the world stared at, whispered about, and ultimately misunderstood. But the money was never the real story. The real story was the silence that money was meant to protect. Jocelyn did not marry into new wealth. She married into old money, the most dangerous kind. The Wildenstein family was not known for mansions or yachts splashed across magazines. Their empire was built on invisibility. For 4 generations, they controlled one of the most powerful art dynasties on earth, trading masterpieces by Rembrandt, Van Gogh, Cézanne, and dozens more, while remaining largely unknown to the public. Their clients were dictators, oligarchs, shadowy collectors who paid extraordinary premiums for discretion. The Wildensteins did not simply sell art. They sold silence. Old money follows a different rulebook. Scandal is not managed through apology or public relations. It is avoided entirely, or if unavoidable, buried fast and deep. Offshore trusts, Caribbean shell companies, and hidden warehouse vaults formed a financial maze designed to keep ownership opaque and accountability distant. For more than a century, it worked. Until a marriage that began with a lion hunt in Kenya ended in a Manhattan townhouse, a young Russian model, and a loaded 9mm pistol. Jocelyn's origins were modest. Born Jocelyn Paraset in Lausanne, Switzerland, she was the daughter of a sporting goods store manager. There was no inheritance, no safety net, no path into elite society. What she did have was ambition and adaptability. By the late 1970s, she had reinvented herself entirely. She moved through European artistic circles, studied in Paris, and entered the orbit of global wealth through carefully chosen relationships. Her connection to Saudi arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi opened doors that rarely opened twice. Those doors led her to Kenya, to Aljogi Ranch, a 66,000-acre wildlife reserve north of Nairobi. The Wildenstein family had just acquired nearly half of it, transforming the land into a private kingdom of access, complete with artificial lakes, luxury lodges, and absolute privacy. It was there, in 1977, that Jocelyn met Alec Wildenstein, the reluctant heir to the family empire. He had never chosen his life. He had been assigned it. Their relationship formed quickly, bound by silence, wealth, and power imbalance. Within a year, they eloped to Las Vegas, bypassing family approval and tradition. Jocelyn entered a world where monthly expenses exceeded what most people earn in a lifetime. What she did not yet understand was that in the Wildenstein universe, money could be unlimited, but control never was. This was not a fairy tale marriage heading for a dramatic ending. It was the beginning of a long war between secrecy and exposure. And secrecy, once broken, never fully recovers. Once Jocelyn Wildenstein crossed the threshold into the Wildenstein world, money stopped behaving like money. It became atmosphere. Invisible, endless, assumed. Court records later revealed that her monthly spending routinely exceeded $1 million, not because of extravagance in the conventional sense, but because excess itself was the baseline. Food and wine alone cost more than $500,000 a year. Flowers were delivered daily, not for occasions, but for presents. Clothing budgets reached hundreds of thousands annually. Jewelry collections grew into the tens of millions. This was not consumption. It was ritual. The couple maintained multiple residences across continents, each staffed, curated, and insulated from the outside world. A centuries-old French chateau. A penthouse in Manhattan's Olympic Tower. A sprawling townhouse on East 64th Street. The vast Aljogi Ranch in Kenya. A Caribbean retreat for strategic disappearance. Each property functioned as a fortress, designed not just for luxury, but for control. Privacy was enforced through employees who answered to the family, not to Jocelyn. Even at the height of her spending power, authority was conditional. Inside this rarefied bubble, Jocelyn's physical transformation began. By the early 1980s, she underwent her first cosmetic procedures. Over time, surgeries became more frequent and more extreme. Her eyes were reshaped, pulled outward and upward. Her cheekbones were augmented into sharp architectural planes. Facelifts layered upon facelifts followed. Fillers, grafts, and sculpting slowly replaced the face she once had. To the public, her appearance became spectacle. To the tabloids, it became mockery. To Alec, it became ammunition. The most widely circulated narrative claimed Alec encouraged Jocelyn to alter her face to resemble the big cats he adored, lions and leopards that roamed Aljogi Ranch. It was a story too strange to resist, and it stuck. Jocelyn rejected it completely. She insisted her surgeries were personal choices, not marital commands. But the truth, as with most things in the Wildenstein marriage, lived somewhere between autonomy and pressure. When money is unlimited but permission is not, choice becomes a blurred concept. While Jocelyn's face became more artificial, the marriage itself grew more unstable. Alec began openly pursuing younger women. Affairs were not hidden particularly well, perhaps because secrecy within the family had always been selective. What mattered was not fidelity, but containment. Jocelyn tolerated humiliation as long as the financial structure held. The spending continued. The lifestyle remained intact. Appearances, at least internally, were preserved. By the mid-1990s, the scale of their expenditures had reached levels that even Manhattan's elite found shocking. Telephone bills alone exceeded $60,000 a year. Laundry and dry cleaning cost more than some people's annual rent. Veterinary care for their private menagerie rivaled hospital budgets. Aljogi Ranch employed hundreds of permanent staff members to maintain artificial lakes, swimming pools, roads, buildings, and animals across tens of thousands of acres. In just 2 years, 1995 and 1996, their combined personal and household expenses surpassed $25 million. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. Money was still flowing, but power was consolidating elsewhere. Jocelyn's access depended entirely on Alec's goodwill and the family's tolerance. She did not control accounts. She did not own assets outright. She lived inside a system designed to appear generous while remaining reversible. This distinction would later become fatal. The breaking point arrived on September 3, 1997. Jocelyn returned unannounced to the Manhattan townhouse, expecting routine emptiness. Instead, she found Alec in their marital bed with a 21-year-old Russian model. The confrontation escalated rapidly. According to police reports, Alec produced a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, pointing it at Jocelyn and her bodyguards. In that instant, a private marital dispute crossed into criminal territory. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Alec was arrested and spent a night in jail. A judge issued an order of protection, forcing him out of his own home and allowing Jocelyn to remain. For the first time in over a century, the Wildenstein family appeared in police reports, court records, and tabloids simultaneously. Their invisibility shattered. For an empire built on silence, this was not merely scandal. It was an existential threat. And the family responded the only way it knew how. Not with apology. Not with reconciliation. But with financial warfare. Within days, Jocelyn's monthly allowance was slashed by more than half. Credit cards were cancelled. Household staff were instructed to ignore her orders. Safe combinations were changed. Access to property and documents was revoked. Even her mother, who was receiving Alzheimer's care at Aljogi Ranch, became leverage. The message was clear. Submission or suffocation. Jocelyn chose war. When Jocelyn Wildenstein chose to fight, she did not merely file for divorce. She challenged a dynasty. What followed was not a domestic legal dispute, but a full-scale exposure of how old money survives scrutiny. The Wildensteins had avoided public accounting for generations. Now, a Manhattan courtroom threatened to do what no tax authority or journalist ever had. Force them to explain where the money was, who controlled it, and how it moved. Alec Wildenstein's legal strategy was as audacious as it was fragile. His attorneys argued that he was essentially poor. According to sworn statements, Alec claimed to earn barely $100,000 a year, functioning as an unpaid assistant to his father, Daniel Wildenstein. Every significant asset, from townhouses to paintings to aircraft, allegedly belonged to Daniel alone. Alec, they insisted, owned nothing. He was merely a caretaker, living on family generosity. The claim collapsed almost immediately under its own weight. Court records showed Alec signing documents transferring millions between corporate entities. He served as vice president of the company that owned the East 64th Street townhouse. His pistol license identified him as a company officer. Monthly checks ranging from $200,000 to $250,000 flowed from accounts bearing his name. Yet he insisted he had no income, no wealth, no control. State Supreme Court Judge Marilyn Diamond was not amused. In open court, she called the defense an insult to judicial intelligence and an affront to common sense. Her ruling transformed the divorce into something far more dangerous for the Wildensteins. She ordered expansive financial discovery. Offshore entities, trust structures, corporate records, shell companies. For the first time, the architecture of the Wildenstein Empire was no longer protected by tradition or intimidation. What emerged was a labyrinth designed to defeat accountability. Companies registered in Luxembourg, the Cayman Islands, Guernsey, and other secrecy jurisdictions appeared in filings. Assets were layered through trusts whose beneficiaries were deliberately obscured. Paintings moved between entities without clear ownership. The structure was legal in form, but aggressive in intent. It was built not to grow wealth, but to make it unreachable. As scrutiny intensified, Alec fled the country rather than appear for depositions. His attorney blamed potential tax problems allegedly created by Jocelyn's claims. Judge Diamond responded with an unmistakable warning. Continued obstruction, she said, would result in consequences far more severe than financial embarrassment. The threat was clear. The court could refer findings to tax authorities, both American and foreign. That possibility triggered the family's worst fear. Government attention. French authorities, alerted by disclosures in New York, began examining undeclared Wildenstein assets. The family that had operated quietly across borders now faced investigations on multiple fronts. What had begun as a divorce had metastasized into an international compliance nightmare. Under this pressure, the Wildensteins moved toward settlement. In 1999, Jocelyn was awarded what newspapers described as an unprecedented package. $2.5 billion, plus $100 million annually for 13 years. On paper, the total approached $3.8 billion. Headlines declared her the most expensive divorcee in history. The figure was repeated endlessly, rarely questioned. But the structure of the settlement mattered more than the number. Much of the payment came not in cash, but in artwork, real estate interests, and trust arrangements. Assets that were difficult to liquidate. Assets whose values depended on internal appraisals controlled by the very family transferring them. The court imposed an unusual condition. Jocelyn was prohibited from using settlement funds for cosmetic surgery, a clause that publicly validated Alec's narrative about her appearance while asserting judicial control over her spending. At the time, the settlement looked like victory. Jocelyn walked away with billions in nominal value. The Wildensteins preserved their freedom and avoided criminal exposure. But beneath the surface, the final deception was already embedded. Several artworks included in the settlement were grossly overvalued. One painting attributed to Velázquez later proved to be a forgery. Another, attributed to Cézanne and valued at tens of millions, sold at auction for a fraction of its stated worth. The myth of the $3.8 billion divorce began to unravel quietly. Without headlines. Without spectacle. Value evaporated as reality replaced appraisal. Cash flow mattered more than theoretical worth. And control, as always, remained elsewhere. When Alec Wildenstein died of prostate cancer in 2008, the final lever was pulled. The family trust argued that his death terminated any remaining payment obligations. By 2015, Jocelyn's $100 million annual payments stopped entirely. Her last payment amounted to just over $100,000. The war was over. The dynasty had survived. And the woman who supposedly won history's largest divorce had discovered the most expensive lesson of all. Money you do not control is not yours. After the payments stopped, reality arrived without ceremony. There was no courtroom drama, no final confrontation, no apology. The money simply vanished. Jocelyn Wildenstein, once portrayed as the woman who secured the largest divorce settlement in history, found herself confronting a truth that few headlines ever corrected. The wealth had never truly been hers. It had been conditional, structured, and ultimately revocable. For years after the divorce, Jocelyn attempted to maintain the life she had been promised. She lived in luxury residences, continued to spend at levels consistent with her settlement, and assumed the annual payments would arrive as agreed. But without steady cash flow, even extraordinary assets become liabilities. Property taxes did not care about nominal net worth. Maintenance costs did not accept art as payment. Staff salaries required cash, not appraisals. By the early 2010s, the cracks were impossible to ignore. Jocelyn's Trump World Tower condominiums, once symbols of post-divorce independence, became financial traps. Monthly expenses mounted while income evaporated. Friends later described her scrambling to keep up appearances, borrowing quietly, refusing to publicly acknowledge how far she had fallen. Pride, shaped by decades of wealth, does not dissolve easily. In 2018, the illusion finally collapsed. Jocelyn filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in New York. The filings were devastating in their simplicity. Her checking account balance was listed as zero. Assets were minimal. A 2006 Bentley valued at $35,000. Clothing valued at $1,000. Household items worth almost nothing. Against this, she owed millions to banks, credit card companies, and attorneys. The contrast between myth and ledger could not have been more brutal. Perhaps the most revealing detail was her monthly income. $900 from Social Security. That was it. The woman whose name had once been synonymous with billions was surviving on an amount that barely covered groceries in Manhattan. In sworn affidavits, Jocelyn admitted she relied on friends and family to pay basic living expenses. She was not exaggerating. She was documenting collapse. Public fascination, once cruel, now turned indifferent. The tabloids that had mocked her appearance lost interest in her finances. The same media ecosystem that inflated her divorce into legend had no appetite for the slow, unglamorous reality of bankruptcy. There was no viral redemption arc. No collective apology. Silence returned, but this time it offered no protection. Through it all, one figure remained by her side. Lloyd Klein, her fashion designer fiancé, stayed during the financial free fall. He appeared in interviews defending her, insisting she had been manipulated and misrepresented for decades. Their relationship, long viewed as eccentric, became one of the few constants in her final years. Loyalty, it seemed, arrived only after money left. In 2023, financial desperation drove Jocelyn to participate in an HBO documentary. It was not an attempt to reclaim fame, but to reclaim narrative. For the first time, she spoke openly about betrayal, about being cut off without warning, about discovering that promises written into settlements can dissolve when trusts decide to reinterpret obligations. She did not portray herself as innocent. She portrayed herself as outmatched. Meanwhile, the Wildenstein family maintained its tradition of silence. Guy Wildenstein, Alec's brother and heir, made no public comment about the terminated payments. French authorities continued to investigate allegations of tax fraud related to undeclared art holdings. The dynasty endured, bruised but intact. Secrecy had bent, not broken. On December 31, 2024, Jocelyn Wildenstein died in Paris at the age of 84. Exactly 25 years after the settlement that defined her public identity. The timing felt almost scripted, though nothing else about her ending was cinematic. She died without wealth, without power, and largely without the attention that had once followed her everywhere. Her story leaves behind an uncomfortable lesson. In systems built on control rather than ownership, money is not security. In families where assets exist inside trusts rather than names, marriage is not partnership. And in a world obsessed with headline numbers, the most important figures often sit quietly in footnotes. The $3.8 billion divorce never truly existed. It was a construction. A valuation. A narrative. What remained, at the end, was a woman who discovered too late that visibility without control is vulnerability, and that old money always writes its contracts in disappearing ink. Jocelyn Wildenstein's legacy is often reduced to a caricature. The face. The money. The headline number that refused to die. But when the noise fades, what remains is not spectacle, but structure. Her story exposes how power actually operates inside dynastic wealth, and why so many public myths collapse under private accounting. The Wildenstein divorce did not shatter old money. It demonstrated its resilience. The family absorbed scandal, surrendered cash flow, and protected the core. Assets stayed inside trusts. Control stayed with bloodlines. Losses were managed, not felt. Even when forced into discovery, the system adapted. That is the defining trait of old money. It does not panic. It outlasts. Jocelyn, by contrast, lived on the surface of that system. She was granted access without authorship. Spending without governance. Visibility without authority. For years, this distinction was invisible, even to her. When money arrives regularly, structure feels irrelevant. Only when it stops does architecture reveal itself. By then, leverage is gone. The public fixation on her appearance served a useful function. It distracted from the mechanics. While audiences debated surgery and spectacle, few examined trusts, appraisals, liquidity, or revocability. Her face became the story so the system did not have to be. This is not accidental. Power prefers mockery to inquiry. The divorce also revealed a truth about settlements that rarely enters popular conversation. Numbers on paper are not outcomes. They are starting points. Without enforcement mechanisms, independent trustees, and clear survivorship clauses, even historic settlements can evaporate. Jocelyn did not lose because she failed to negotiate. She lost because she negotiated within a universe designed to remain asymmetric. Her bankruptcy filings read like a quiet indictment of headline culture. For decades, she was cited as proof that marriage into wealth guarantees security. In reality, she became proof of the opposite. Wealth without control is exposure. Luxury without ownership is risk. And fame without leverage is disposable. There is also a gendered dimension that cannot be ignored. Jocelyn was scrutinized for how she spent, how she looked, and how she aged. Alec was scrutinized for how he hid. The court ultimately forced disclosure, but public judgment remained uneven. Her choices were moralized. His strategies were contextualized. This imbalance is not unique to her case, but her visibility magnified it. In her final years, Jocelyn attempted something rare. She tried to reclaim authorship. Interviews and documentaries were not about sympathy. They were about correction. She wanted the record to reflect what actually happened, not what was convenient to believe. That effort came late, and it came at a cost. But it mattered. History will likely remember the number longer than the nuance. 3.8 billion is easy to repeat. Trust structures are not. Yet for those willing to look deeper, Jocelyn Wildenstein's life offers a clearer lesson than any cautionary tale about excess. It shows how systems protect themselves, how narratives are weaponized, and how individuals can mistake proximity for power. She was not destroyed by vanity. She was undone by architecture. An architecture built long before she entered it, designed to endure long after she left. The Wildensteins did not defeat her in court. They outlasted her in structure. In the end, Jocelyn Wildenstein was neither villain nor victor. She was a participant in a system that promised everything and guaranteed nothing. Her rise was real. Her fall was procedural. And her story stands as a reminder that in the world of old money, survival is not about how much you receive, but about what you control when the silence returns. If Jocelyn Wildenstein's story feels unsettling, it is because it punctures a fantasy many people quietly hold. The fantasy is simple. That proximity to wealth equals power. That marriage into money creates permanence. That a large enough number, written into a legal document, can override systems built over centuries. Her life demonstrates how fragile those assumptions really are. Old money does not function like modern wealth. It does not rely on visibility, branding, or public validation. It relies on continuity. Continuity of control, continuity of discretion, continuity of internal rules that do not bend to external pressure. The Wildenstein Empire existed long before Alec, and it continued after him. Individuals were replaceable. The structure was not. Jocelyn entered that structure as an outsider who learned its surface language but never its grammar. She learned how to live richly, how to host, how to spend, how to appear untouchable. What she never fully possessed was institutional memory. She did not inherit the instincts that come from generations of asset protection, legal insulation, and strategic retreat. When conflict arrived, she fought as an individual against a machine. That machine did not need to crush her publicly. It only needed to wait. Time was its greatest ally. Lawsuits end. Judges retire. Headlines move on. Trusts remain. When payments stopped, there was no spectacle, because spectacle was unnecessary. The system simply reverted to its default state, ownership without obligation. This is why the end of Jocelyn's financial support felt so sudden and so absolute. From her perspective, it was betrayal. From the system's perspective, it was closure. The settlement had served its purpose. Exposure had been contained. Risk had been managed. Silence could resume. There is a deeper irony in how her story is remembered. Jocelyn is often cited as evidence of excess, as a warning about greed or obsession. Yet her actual downfall came not from spending too much, but from trusting too much. She trusted that a settlement implied partnership. She trusted that promises extended beyond the life of the man who signed them. She trusted that courts could permanently override dynastic logic. None of those assumptions held. Her face, endlessly discussed, became a metaphor people misunderstood. It was not proof of vanity. It was proof of adaptation. Jocelyn altered herself to survive in an environment where appearance was currency and youth was leverage. When those adaptations later became ridicule, they served the system again, shifting focus away from accountability and toward spectacle. Even in death, the imbalance persisted. Jocelyn passed away quietly, without restitution, without reversal, without a final acknowledgement from the family that had once defined her existence. The Wildensteins did not need to respond. Silence had always been their most effective defense. What remains, then, is not a morality tale, but a structural one. Jocelyn Wildenstein's life shows how narratives are constructed to protect systems. The public was given a villain, a number, and a face. What it was not given was a map. Without the map, the system remained intact. For viewers willing to look past the headlines, her story reframes how power should be understood. Power is not visibility. It is not liquidity. It is not even wealth. Power is authorship over rules. Jocelyn had access to resources, but she never authored the rules governing them. When conflict arose, authorship prevailed. This is why her story still resonates. Not because of the money, but because of the realization it forces. That security built on permission is temporary. That settlements without control clauses are fragile. That silence, when weaponized, outperforms outrage. Jocelyn Wildenstein did not lose because she lacked intelligence, ambition, or resilience. She lost because she fought a system designed not to win arguments, but to survive them. And in that sense, her life is less about tragedy and more about revelation. The greatest illusion of the $3.8 billion divorce was not the number. It was the belief that the story was ever about money at all. In the end, Jocelyn Wildenstein's story does not conclude with a verdict or a balance sheet. It ends with a question. How could the woman linked to the most expensive divorce in history die with almost nothing? The answer is uncomfortable, because it challenges how wealth, power, and security are commonly understood. The $3.8 billion figure became a symbol, repeated so often that it replaced reality. It suggested victory, leverage, and permanence. But symbols do not pay bills. Structures do. Jocelyn's settlement was real in form, but fragile in substance. It depended on mechanisms she did not control and promises that could be reinterpreted once scrutiny faded. When those mechanisms withdrew, the number lost all meaning. Her life exposes the difference between possessing wealth and being permitted to use it. For years, Jocelyn lived as though those two conditions were the same. Only after the payments stopped did the separation become clear. Access is not ownership. Spending is not power. And visibility is not protection. There is a temptation to frame her story as a cautionary tale about excess or personal choices. That interpretation is convenient, but incomplete. Jocelyn did not fail because she lived extravagantly. She failed because she trusted a system designed to remain asymmetrical. She negotiated inside a world where the rules were inherited, not written at the table. When conflict arose, tradition outranked contracts. What makes her story linger is not spectacle, but silence. The Wildenstein dynasty retreated back into invisibility, largely untouched. The public moved on. The narrative froze at the headline number. Meanwhile, Jocelyn lived out her final years stripped of wealth, influence, and recourse. The imbalance remained uncorrected. Yet her story still matters. It reveals how old power protects itself, how legal victories can mask structural defeat, and how myths are used to distract from mechanics. Jocelyn Wildenstein became famous for her face and infamous for a number. But neither explains what actually happened. If her life offers a lesson, it is this. In systems built on inheritance and secrecy, security is not granted through marriage, courts, or publicity. It is granted through control. Without it, even the largest settlements can dissolve quietly, leaving behind only stories that sound like victories but function like warnings. Jocelyn Wildenstein did not walk away with billions. She walked away with visibility. And visibility, without leverage, is the most fragile currency of all. That is the real legacy of the divorce that shocked high society.